Hi everybody, today we are going to finish with the fascist revolution and we are going to talk about Benito Mussolini, the leader of the fascist party and the leader of the fascist revolution in Italy. In order to know something about him, we have to say that he was born in 1883. At first, he was a teacher, but then he became a journalist. He started working in a paper called Avanti, but because of his ideas, he was deprived of his position in Avanti. Therefore, he founded his own paper, Il Popolo d'Italia. But in 1917, he was called to serve in the war in World War I, and he proved to be a good soldier, and he was ascended to sergeant. When he was a sergeant, he was wounded and he had to return home. When he was in Italy again, he retook his position of editor in Il Popolo d'Italia, where he started to spread his ideas about fascism. In the war, he got to know communists and socialists from Russia. And remember that one of the principles of fascism is militarism. So he hated socialists and communists in Russia because they didn't support war. And one of the principles of fascism is that war ennobles men and regenerates sluggish and decadent people, remember. So after coming back to Italy and taking again the position of editor in Il Popolo d'Italia, he founded the Milan Fascio Party. He devoted his attention to combat defeatism. In Italy, the situation was really complicated at that time. Italian workers were badly paid. They organized strikes and they dreamed with a Russian revolution. It is said that in 1920, approximately more than 500 strikes were produced. The parliament was a disaster. Deputies behaved as naughty adolescents. No political party gained representation in the parliament. So there were political problems. No party was strong enough to rule by itself. So the government often changed. Between 1920 and 1922, Italy had 20 prime ministers. Yes, you listened correctly. 20 prime ministers. In the parliament, as I told you before, deputies behaved as unruly school children. They threw paper darts at each other, and debates even ended up in fights. So the situation, politically speaking, was a disaster. As Mussolini, as I told you before, hated the communists, and he realized that there were strikes and that those workers were dreaming with a Russian revolution, he organized this fasci di combattimento, that is to say, groups of fights to confront these strikes. They were called the Black Shirts. So Mussolini and the Black Shirts. He and his groups organized raids in order to torture those strikers. He had the support of the nobles. Why? Because owners of factories supported him. They even gave him money and loaned lorries to go on raids. Why? Because as workers were dreaming with a Russian revolution, capitalists were afraid of losing their private property, so they gave all the support to Mussolini. Mussolini relied on terror, so the fasci went on attacking their enemies. Who were their enemies? Their enemies, that is to say, Mussolini and the Black Shirts' enemies were the strikers who just wanted better working conditions, but they dreamed with a Russian revolution. And remember that Mussolini, as he hated the Russians, he was against the strikers. He started a campaign. This method was called squadronism. Mussolini and his black shirts started a campaign of terrorization which included clubbing the victims till death, pulling teeth and nails, kidnapping, murder, make them eat live toads, and make workers swallow castor oil. So strikers became less common, less frequent in Italy, and Mussolini started to gain the support of the capitalists. Then he managed, of course, to gain the support of all Italy. When the old regime became weak, Mussolini decided to send an ultimatum demanding new elections, a vigorous foreign policy, and 5 positions in the cabinet. The government of Victor Emmanuel III at first ignored his request. So Mussolini and with his army of 50,000 men with the black shirts marched to Rome. When he occupied Rome, this occupation is known as the first stage of the fascist revolution. When he was in Rome, the prime minister resigned, and Victor Emmanuel III, the king, invited, between inverted commas because he didn't have any other option, invited Mussolini to form a cabinet. So, without firing a shot, the black-shirted legions had gained control of the government. Why was this possible? Not only because the strength of fascism, but by the lack of any firm devotion by the Italian people to constitutional government. Remember that we always said that Italians were more interested in the greatness of the nation than in democracy. After his arrival at the government, Mussolini forced through parliament a new electoral law. The fascists received more votes than any other party and filled the parliament with fascist leaders. He declared all political parties illegal except for fascist party, abolished the cabinet system, and he was responsible solely to the king. We already know that the economic policy he carried out was the policy of the corporate state. We have already explained was that. So Mussolini became the leader of the government in Italy. When Mussolini took control of the government, he put into practice almost all the principles of fascism. Rather than frightening his people, Mussolini tried to win their support. The newspapers and radio gave out endless propaganda about Mussolini, and this is connected with totalitarianism. Remember, there must be only a fascist press, so there was a strong censorship. Besides, at schools, the fascists decided what students had to learn, and this is what we call indoctrination. If we come back to the principle of fascism, this part of indoctrination is that there must be only a fascist education. There was also improvement in industry, and this was really good. Subsidies and protective tariffs had greatly expanded industrial production, particularly of such commodities as silk, rayon, and automobiles. Between 1923 and 1933, Italy almost doubled her hydroelectric power resources. So it was very important in the industrial field. Also, Mussolini made an agreement with the Pope, which was a clever move since most Italians are, and at that time were, Roman Catholics. Mussolini also hoped to make this country, Italy, a better place. He expected everyone to be hard-working and efficient, and at least succeeded in making the trains run on time. To cure unemployment, he started public works like building roads and expensive town halls. One of his achievements was to drain an unpleasant swamp near Rome called the Pontine Marshes. Italian rulers had been trying to do that for centuries, and Mussolini could boast he had succeeded where Caesar failed. So he compared himself with Julius Caesar, and he wanted an empire. But could Mussolini be an emperor without an empire? Well, this is something which is connected with the negative effects of Mussolini in the government, because he, in the attempt to make Italy self-sufficient, he prohibited imports, so there were higher prices because there was no competitions. There was no competition between foreign markets. Workers did not improve their standard of living, beyond the fact that wages were higher. They were raised. As products were more and more expensive, it was impossible for workers to improve their standard of living. And in the field of what I have just told about empire, well, so he started to conquer new territories as colonies. For example, in 1935, Mussolini sent his armies to conquer Abyssinia, which nowadays is Ethiopia. He had an easy victory, so on May the 9th, 1936, Mussolini announced to cheering crowds that they at last had an empire worthy of them. The conquest of Abyssinia was a great triumph for Mussolini, but it was also the beginning of his fall. Until then, Italy had been on good terms with her former allies, that is to say, Great Britain and France. And now, with this conquest, they turned against Italy. Mussolini's answer was to make friends with Hitler, his biggest friend at that time. And in 1936, they signed an agreement called the Rome-Berlin Axis. So Mussolini entered the war in 1940, entered the war on the side of Germany. But it was even worse than in World War I, because she was humiliated many times before she surrendered in 1943. As for Mussolini, well, Mussolini tried to escape and Hitler saved him many times, but he was captured with his mistress, and all the love that the Italians showed for Mussolini when he started governing Italy turned around, because some of his own people shot him and hung him upside down in a public square in Milan. That was the end of Benito Mussolini and fascism in Italy.